Previously on RWBY. After everything that's gone on up to this point, RWBY has a breakdown and leaves Weiss, Jean, Blake, and Yang behind, where Little and Crescent Rose, RWBY's weapon, are the only things that accompany her to an unknown destination. While on the way to said destination, RWBY decides to split up from Little, with the intentions presumably being to save Little's life. Upon arrival to this unknown destination, Neo has brought along people that have died from the earlier volumes, all pointing fingers at RWBY for everything that has happened up to this point. Meanwhile, the group of Weiss, Jean, Blake, and Yang decide to figure out where RWBY went, because Jean has that map of certain aspects of the Ever After, and Weiss finally revealing that she had some degree of knowledge of the fact that RWBY wasn't being RWBY. All the while, Jean is being silent, and Yang and Blake realizing that they really haven't been paying attention to certain things because they are too concerned about each other. Back at the house of Neo, RWBY gets tortured like you wouldn't believe. Now, it is at a certain point that Curious Cat comes back and shows her true colors at last, where Little, who refuses to stay away from RWBY, intervenes, preventing Curious Cat from doing whatever they intended to do with RWBY. Now, it is Neo at this point that she decides to step in and maybe try to save RWBY, but the efforts became too little too late, and Neo winds up killing Little in the end result, with RWBY having to watch. Now, at a couple of points, RWBY is given a cup of tea with a beverage and a leaf inside of it. And with Little's presumed death, everybody else on Team RWBY, alongside Jean and Juniper, arrive to see everything that is about to happen. Now, in Yang's perspective, she sees RWBY drink this particular beverage with the leaf. And as we see here, RWBY, Little, the beverage, and the cup, alongside Crescent Rose, go into another location, leaving Neo and the remainder of Team RWBY with John and Juniper in a state of disbelief, with Neo realizing that revenge was not the way to go, and the fact that she is now being questioned, is RWBY enough for her quote-unquote revenge? Now, with the remainder of Team RWBY alongside Jean, it is Neo that's in the state now that has Curious Cat coming up with another scheme in its own right. And it is Jean who confronts Curious Cat about varying other things, which actually proves Jean right about Curious Cat. However, we still don't have information from Jean about other items that come up to this point. Now, Weiss steps away from Blake and Yang, having her hand held out, figuring out what is about to transpire. Where Weiss, Blake, Yang, and Jean being knocked back, although Jean isn't as hurt as everybody else. And it is at this point where Jean is confronted by Curious Cat, who possesses Neo about Jean's so-called sob story. The question remains at this point, is the end of the intro to Volume 6 having shown that a Team RWBY is about to completely split up? Where did RWBY, Crescent Rose, and Little go? Are they heading into Ascension? Will there be finger pointing between Weiss, Yang, Blake, and even Jean? Who's going to get the bulk of the finger pointing? Who's going to get the least of the finger pointing? And will they try to go after RWBY? Hey guys, Wolfie here and welcome back to the channel. As always, the usual disclaimer. Any opinion here is mine and mine alone. This is RWBY Volume 9, Chapter 9, A Tale Involving a Tree. A few things I want to address here before I get into the real meat and potatoes. First and foremost, this will be multiple recording sessions because there's simply so much to dive into, and that does involve going to a potential hit of something back from Volume 6, but way late in Volume 6. So that's first and foremost. That'll be said some point later on in this video. You'll probably see it. You probably know when I get there. Number 2, for this particular episode, it is the shortest we've seen since Volume 1. Quite some time. Because varying episodes in Volume 1 were quite short, like in single digits in length. Another thing here is that this is going to be multiple recordings because there's quite a bit to go into, and that includes what I mentioned earlier, because there's something in Volume 6 where I feel it's going to be a bit of a hint of what's to come, should we get a green light for future volumes. So, we're not going to waste any more time. Now, for this particular episode, I do have my faithful notes here, so I will be referring to these from time to time, but like I said, when it comes to certain aspects of this episode, I will be you'll probably be seeing another still from a previous episode, that so on and so forth. Then this particular episode starts with Summer Rose. We finally get to hear what she sounds like for the very first time in the entire series. Now, what she's doing here, she's reading a fairy tale, quote-unquote, book to RWBY and Yang. Now, the RWBY and Yang we see at this part of the episode, they're very young. And if you look at the facial expressions for Yang and RWBY, like in this particular scene, is that Yang's mouth was open, but we really don't see like a facial expression of sorts. However, we do see RWBY with a gentle smile on her face, which could lead to another thing I'm going to get into later on in this video between the two of them. But we do know here that Summer tells them a story, and we see here, I'm going to zoom in real quickly, and this is intentional, we see the emblem, Summer's emblem. Now remember, back in Chapter 5, RWBY gives this away to the teapot lady. Now, the way we know it is Summer Rose at last, to see if I can grab it real quick. Well, actually, I don't have the image anymore, but if you look at the end credits very carefully for this particular episode, you do see like the full, the whole thing with Summer. It is 100% confirmed. This is, in fact, Summer Rose. So, again, we start off with the whole thing right here that Summer's ready to tell a story. And Alex's name is very much mentioned. Now, after that whole story time is over with, we do find the remaining four here: Weiss, Jean, Blake, and Yang. They get out of that house that Neil was in, and they go back to the village where they were staying with Jean for an unknown amount of time. Now, they mention here something about the tree. Now, Jean reveals that Curious Cat was right on one thing from the last episode. It's not a place you go. And that's where he starts it, but he doesn't really finish that sentence. But before that, we get to see this character. It's a genial gem. And if you look at the quote-unquote material the genial gems are here as, they're a lot better than the people pleasers. And they were, and this is, if you remember the earlier episodes, it's like the people pleasers really wanted to go to the tree. They wanted to be something better. And this is pretty much the end result. The genial gems, they're working together to really get things back in shape. Forever after. But if you guys remember, the whole thing with Jean starting, it's not a place you go, Weiss ends that sentence, is a place you know. So it looks like they're at the tree. They meet up with Ruby here, and not the Ruby that you really know of. And by that, the herbalist alongside Ruby are quote-unquote wooden statues. And you have to remember, when it comes down to certain aspects of things like wood and paper, I should say, they are both susceptible, very susceptible to the element of fire. So you see here is that Ruby is seen as a statue. But you remember, they see the herbalist moments before. Now, Ruby was like, you see how Ruby is here, it's like, Ruby's not really reciprocating. And Yang here doesn't really have a moment to grieve. But at the same time, we have to know that they really weren't checking up on Ruby. And a lot of people on Twitter were defending Yang's actions when it's like, that really is not the case. Because it's like, the execution of certain aspects in this volume thus far, it's like, certain things were all over the place. The pacing, the way the writing is executed, it's like, with it out of like the scatterbrain like pacing, and the fact that some of this stuff feels quite rushed, it's like you have an increasing amount of people criticizing things, and with this scene is no different. Now, Jean and Blake both, try to give comfort to Yang as the best they could. However, Weiss gives Yang the space. Because it's like, I'm not so sure the exact reason why, but I do feel that it's coming down to the whole thing with Curious Cat. Now, they see the door here, and then it's like John was like, we're able to go home. Although they kind of realized really quickly that Curious Cat, who is like possessing Neo, is preventing them from going back to Remnant. Which, if you really think about it, had the four gone back to Remnant by themselves without an issue, that does mean and leads Ruby Rose beyond vulnerable, because she has to fend for herself regarding the possessed Neo / Curious Cat. And that would have been caused, certain people to really put the blame on Yang for a lot of things. So we do see here is that Curious Cat shows up, and then we do know that Weiss says something really sassy, and Curious Cat's reply was, "You've always been the worst of the bunch." Meaning that some of the blame might be going on to Weiss. However, I still feel that a lot of the blame will go on to Yang, and we're probably going to be figuring that out, hopefully, in the next episode. Now, for the remainder of this particular episode, it's a bit of a going back and forth between, the fights between Weiss, Jean, Blake, and Yang versus Neo / Curious Cat. So it goes back between that and this particular item. Ruby meeting up with the blacksmith. Now, the blacksmith is revealed to be the tree. Now, there's a lot of how do I want to word this? Let me check the time here real quick, because like I said, I'm using an app where it's like, I have to be mindful of the time. But it's like going this back and forth between, Ruby and what appears to be the conclusion of her second trial by fire, which is more than likely the case. And going in the fight here, it's like they're probably going to be calling out for Ruby to save their asses, which in a way is a bit hypocritical, and I'll get to that when I get to my opinion on this episode. But we do know, let's see if I have it real quick. And the thing here is, it's we do know that it ends with this right here. We see Summer's weapon, and Ruby reaches out to it, so it's there's going to be a lot more questions involved in the sense of what we're going to be how will this particular trial by fire end? Because there's a lot of speculation going on with, is Ruby going to be a much more mature version of herself? Is she going to become Summer? We simply do not know that as of yet. And it's something I don't feel we'll really get a chance to know, like, right away. But we do know a little bit more information. I also feel that we're probably going to see what exactly happened to Summer. Because we know that she's dead. We know an invisible monster took her, but what exactly led up to that? And will what happened to Summer, really get Ruby, like, you are enough, so to speak. But like I said, this is going to be multiple recordings because there are certain aspects within each part of this episode that should be explored a little bit further, as well as was a certain aspect from earlier content, a foreshadowing of this. Short answer is yes, but it comes down to what and what happened and what is that potentially foreshadowing. Now, the other quote-unquote ending to the episode, because again, the entire episode ends with Ruby reaching out for Summer's weapon, but that's going to be like that point of view ending. Now, the other ending with this is that we do know that at some point, Weiss pulls out her thing, does a thing with Mirtanaster, and she tries to aim for Neo. Neo ducks by quickly enough and hits Jean instead, which could very well indicate the Joan of Arc death, where Joan of Arc was burned at the stake because of heresy, and then the most serious crime for Joan of Arc, not John to be for the record, is that Joan of Arc rejected church authority in favor of direct inspiration from God. That's pretty much how she died in real life. And if you guys might recall, for Pyrrha, she's based on a real life character who also died. Meaning that we're probably going to be seeing a death for John as well as Neo. Now, there's one other thing I want to go into here real quickly, and it's going to be something, I'm like, I was an idiot for deleting it, but I'm going to show you guys real quickly, and this is where I'm going to do the next portion of this video. The whole thing with Neo here, I'm going to zoom in really quickly. Now, you notice, for those of you who are familiar with Neapolitan ice cream, which is based on strawberry, vanilla, and chocolate, you notice here we're going to go on the left side of Neapolitan's face, pre-possession from Kira's cat. So we do know that for Neo's left side of the face, she has a darker color eye, because for Neo, she has one eye that's a darker color. The other color for the right is like a blue. It's like a shade of blue, which is pretty much akin to the hair you see here. You have the left side a darker color, the right side being a lighter color. Now, for those of you who are familiar with Alex, you notice here that Alex has dark colored hair and her eyes are dark colored. Now, some people are saying that Blacksmith is Alex. However, because of the whole thing with Neo and Neo having no need to go back to Remnant, a part of me thinks Neo is in fact Alex, as opposed to Blacksmith, because the whole thing with Alex is like the hair is like wavy, and long. You notice here that Blacksmith is we can't really tell exactly the length, and we also can't tell the hair color as well as the eye color. What we can reveal here is that the eyes for the Blacksmith, it's a more of a gray, like a silverish gray. So it's in reality, Alex is not Blacksmith, because the eye color is it's very much non-existent in a sense. And then the hairstyle doesn't really match up with Alex. Whereas here, this is not the world's best timed screenshot, but if you look at Neo's hair length, it's a little bit longer, which is closer to Alex than anybody else. which leads me to believe, the supporting evidence for Neo being Alex, it's like there. And then if you take a careful look at the Volume 9 intro, because there's that image of Ruby as she's falling. You see like the image between like Neo, and Neo's doing a particular pose where the left side of her face is like closer to the viewer. And then you see another image like moments after that being Alex, which gives me that conclusion of Alex being Neo. Now this part of the video here, like I said, I do feel that Alex is in fact Neo. Now, like I said moments ago, again, there are varying clues where it's like from the intro and then certain mannerisms that has Neo be more Alex than anybody else. Now here, this is from the latest episode, A Tale Involving a Tree. Now this is from a Curious Cat's perspective, what certain things that happened. Now you have to remember, Jean was with them too. And with them, you have Alex, Lewis, Curious Cat as well. Now we do know, Alex did something with Jean's, bowl of whatever they're consuming. We also know that Lewis was able to go back to Remnant. Alex stayed behind and, to want to make things better. Now, the thing is that we don't know what Alex sounds like at all. And we also know one thing about Neo. And the one thing we know about Neo is that she does not say a single word whenever she is not possessed by Curious Cats. And the reason why this is a very important piece of information to know is because the fact that Neo doesn't really say anything. It's like letting her actions do the talking for her. It's like there's not much of a chance Alex could be the blacksmith. It's more Alex being Neo because of varying things in sense of the hints from the intro and up to this point. And again, to reiterate the hints, and this portion is not going to be long at all. I'm going to try to keep this as short as possible. So a visual hint here is the hair color on the left side of Neo's, the left side, not the right. Because, and mind you, this is before Neo got possessed by Curious Cat. I need some water here shortly. So the left side of Neo is darker colors. You mean dark colored hair, dark colored eyes. And then if you look at the intro really carefully, Neo's left side is you get to see more of the left side than the right. And then at the very end of the intro to Volume 9, it's pretty much the same thing. The Neo's Alex is like this, she's kind of wakes up, and then the right side's on the sand, and then you see the left side, towards the viewer. Now, this is just really quickly, another example of, the left side, You have one side, one color, and the other side, the other color. So this is, another hint, you got to pay really close attention here. Now, the reason why I don't think Alex is the blacksmith, because granted, there's I honestly don't think it's certain things in the face and the hair, it really does not match up. But that is just me. And then the final piece of the puzzle is regarding Neo's actions after Ruby drinks that cup of tea, which has a design of a forget-me-not flower on the that's visible, meaning that Ruby's going to be remembering every last thing. Is that the facial expression you see here with Alex is very much the same as Neo in her immediate reaction with Ruby after Ruby drinks that tea. Meaning that Neo, sad to say this, is Alex. And the blacksmith, who I think the blacksmith could be tied to Summer Rose directly. Now we're going to look at this particular scene from Volume 6, Chapter 11, The Lady in the Shoe. Now, what does this have to do with Volume 9, you ask? Now, we're going to take a look at this particular moment here, like in Lady in the Shoe. This is where Yang comes and rescues Blake via the motorcycle Bumblebee. Now, we know that it knocks Adam out. The motorcycle Bumblebee itself goes into the waters. Now, the reason why I do see some foreshadowing with Yang and Blake breaking up is one thing. And that is the perception of RWBY. Who she is, who she's supposed to be, who she's meant to be. And you think about how some people perceive other people in the way it differs as much as it is, this is pretty much a very huge disagreement. Now, Yang was really wanting to get RWBY out of that state. However, Blake really disagrees with here, saying that it's not for us to decide along those lines. And then with Weiss, she chimes in a little bit later, echoing similar sentiments to Blake, going along with the lines of, we have to accept what RWBY chooses. And out of the four characters, Weiss is the only one who really doesn't give Yang any form of comfort. But if you remember Volume 4, RWBY decided to give Yang some space to sort out her problems. And the fact that Weiss is like, yo, we gotta make sure that let them sort things out on their own. When they're ready, I'll be there for them. Which is very much, echoing what RWBY is doing. In the sense of what RWBY did with Yang in Volume 4, it's like, by RWBY allowing Yang to sort things out on her own before reaching out to others. And Weiss is doing the same thing with RWBY, being that she's allowing RWBY to sort her issues out on her own, because you can't really say, you should do this, you should do that, da-da-da-da-da. Certain things don't work out that way with everybody. And again, we have to remember, Yang was kind of on the opposite as them. Which means that it goes to show another hint of, a major hint of Yang and Blake breaking up eventually, because it's like, when it comes to perception of people, who they're supposed to be, who they're meant to be, and how you see them as, it's like, come on, man. You can't really push certain things, push certain things onto them if it's not what they really want to do. And the thing here is, it's like, I think Yang's gonna be either taking the brunt of the blame, being the bulk of it, or Weiss is gonna be blamed for this because, the whole thing with Curious Cat. But something tells me it's gonna be on Yang, because it's like the whole thing with family and Yang's aspects of the selfishness is gonna come to light. Now, granted, Weiss is not much better in certain respects, but Weiss has owned up to her mistakes a lot more so than Yang regarding RWBY. Because you have to remember, beginning of Volume 8, Yang was the one who questioned RWBY, and everybody got on Yang's case about that, because it's it was the recipe for dividing things. Despite the fact that both Blake and Weiss, back in Volume 1 in their respective points, questioned other things about RWBY, which Yang chose to ignore. And what Yang keeps on doing is what she chooses to look into, what she chooses to ignore. It kind of spells a recipe for her to not really be in a relationship with somebody like Blake at this time. Even though you have to remember Volume 6, Chapters 11 and 12, where it's the fight does end up in Adam's death. It's Adam was revealing that Blake has a selfish side to her, and it's not 100% honest. So it's one of those things, there's a lot of things that the team has to sort out. And I do feel that in the end of the day, the Adam Yang Blake fight, Volume 6, Chapters 11 and 12, it's very much of a pretty big hint in the sense of why Blake and Yang wind up breaking up. Again, that's just my personal opinion. I do feel the hint is here because once Yang gets rid of the motorcycle, which is the basis of the ship name, it's that could be the end of that for Blake and Yang, because it's The communication's not really honest, not really like consistent, and it's like perception of certain things doesn't really match up. And then you have to look at volume 7, I forgot which chapter, is where Blake and Yang talk about the whole thing with Adam. It's like they're clashing. Meaning that Blake was like more of the time where it's like so many deaths were not really as necessary. Blake's all, we did what we had to do. And that could mean that Yang could turn out to be more like Raven in sense of action. And another thing here is that, and this is a bit of like a prediction of mine, should RWBY get renewed, all that stuff, when it comes to them coming back to Baekyo, it's like Yang and Blake might be wanted for murder of Adam, because so we all know we've seen them kill Adam, but when it comes to finding his body. And unfortunately, yeah, they may become wanted criminals. Blake, in a sense, might be more wanted in a sense because Adam's not the first faunus she's killed. Because you have to remember that fight in her home in Volume 5, where it's more of a self-defense, so to speak. So Blake might be a wanted criminal for murder. But, and this is going to be one of those portions where it's going to be short because it's like the whole thing with Bumblebee. I will be referring to this image once I get to that video, once I get sense of like preparing all that stuff. So you will be seeing this again in a separate video on Bumblebee. With all that out of the way, what do I think about this particular chapter? Now, in sense of length, meaning that it's the shortest we've seen since Volume 1, this leaves, in some respects, a lot to be desired and not in a good way. Now, granted, the volume itself, it's quite decent in sense of like the overall aspect of it, but when it comes to some of the chapters in this particular volume, it leaves a decent deal to be desired. This particular episode leaves a lot more to be desired than the remainder of the volume up to this point, because varying aspects here felt quite rushed. The pacing was very scatterbrained, all over the place. It's like I honestly couldn't really keep up in certain regards. It's like Yang not being able to grieve. It's just like, and amongst other things, and the prospect of the rest of the Team RWBY alongside Jean willing to leave RWBY behind. So if you think about it like that, where it's like, I think some of the selfishness within the Team RWBY, outside of RWBY, it's like they were willing to get out of here. And for a moment, they thought that they were able to before Curious Cat / Neo shows up. And that selfishness is like, it's kind of like exposing certain things from varying people from the previous content. And the fact that the pacing here is terrible. A lot of the comments on the Crunchyroll website reveals this as the case. Like, they were not really happy with the fact that the pacing was bad, the execution is bad, although the writing aspect of it was good. It's just that certain aspects as standalone, like the writing, the animation, as standalones is good, but if you execute it in a way where it sucks, people are going to see it like that. And it's unknown exactly how long the final chapter of Volume 9 is going to be. Some people are saying it's going to be a bit more than about 20 minutes. And it's like, I don't even think that's going to be enough, in my personal opinion. Because it's like, some of the episodes in this volume thus far, it's like, it's quite short. And part of the pacing is like, I couldn't really keep up with what's going on. And it's repeating the same mistakes RWBY has had with the writing this entire time. Meaning that the increasing amount of calls for a rewrite and or cancellation of RWBY altogether, it's pretty much, it's like if it's not the writing on the writing's not on the wall yet, it's pretty much at this point. Because I honestly don't see why, people keep on blindly supporting this. It's like, you have, the execution just makes things bad. No one on the RWBY side, in sense of the writing, is really listening. The only one that's closest to listening to the people is Miles. And sometimes he has his issues with the writings. It's like, come on, really? And again, and some people were mentioning, White Knight being confirmed, but if you remember that planning meeting back in Volume 8 and Slate where Whitley and Weiss were standing, everybody else was seated, it's more and more becoming one-sided. Now, the thing here with Weiss and Yang, like I said, I do feel that those two are going to be coming to butt heads pretty soon, because Weiss was the only one who did not comfort Yang about this. It also shows that you have a Team RWBY that's not on the same page. And it's something they all have to admit. And sadly, things got to be more consistent for RWBY if it really wants to continue. And I'm going to be one of those people who's going to say RWBY in his entire show needs a rewrite from the beginning. Because honestly, part of me really cannot keep up with what's going on with everything being so scattered-brained. The pacing all over the place, the pacing being rushed as well. And it's like, it just left a decent deal to be desired. It's like, I just saw, the Super Mario Brothers movie earlier today, and it's like, granted, it's about an hour and a half for that movie, but everything just clicked in ways that RWBY isn't. And for me to compare a movie to a show like this, it's like, it's heartbreaking. It's sad. And things are not being explored correctly. What gives? And to end this particular video, it's like, this show needs a rewrite from the beginning. Because the execution needs to be a lot better. Things need to be more consistent. And the way things are going right now, it's just like, I'll continue watching the show, but it's like, I really can't be a part of it anymore. That's all I have. With Wolvie here signing off, I will catch you all on the flip side.